guys. We're incredibly excited to be part of the Stan Deutsch family. They've been a great group of folks to work with. Elena's been a rock star, and we're really looking forward to seeing what we can do in the New York market and really around the world, knowing that a lot of the spec work that happens in New York goes elsewhere. So quick kind of overview of what we're going to try to cover today, and I know we're short on time. We're going to try to cover most of this in 20 to 25 minutes and leave it open at the end for Q&A. But if you do have questions, send them in, put them in the text box, and Elena will MC, and we can probably try to make this relatively interactive as we go through. So I'll first give you a quick introduction on myself. So I joined the company in 2012, back before the concept of POE was in the lexicon of the construction industry, lighting, et cetera, et cetera. Been doing this a long time, have served in a variety of roles, and I can say I've been impatiently waiting for the world to embrace POE, which it seems like it's moving in that direction. So we're really excited about kind of where the market's at right now. Prior to that, I did hard time in the investment banking world, 7 years at Jefferies between New York and San Francisco. Met a number of startup companies broadly across the clean tech space. And honestly, when I met this company, when they first commercialized their product in probably 2010, I thought it was probably in the top 3 of the companies that I had met that really had the potential to be disruptive into an industry that was long overdue for disruption. Little did I know, the construction industry moves a little bit slower than we'd all like, but I think we're finally getting caught up there. So I studied industrial engineering from Lehigh in Pennsylvania, and for all the real engineers out there, that would make me an imaginary engineer to you, but I'll try my best to keep up. So I'm going to start with a little bit about just our company, who we are, give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to jump into the technology, value proposition. And I know there's kind of a wide variety of folks on the call, so I'm going to do a little bit to address everyone from kind of the MEP consultant community to architects, lighting designers, planners that have a bit more of an aesthetic kind of bent to kind of how they see this world of lighting. So hopefully I'll cover everything, but we do have a lot to cover, and there's a lot of different, I think, interested parties. So we'll do our best to kind of make it a blend of technical and some other aspects. A bit about Wtec. So Wtec is the company, Smartengine is the product and the brand. So the Smartengine business unit is 42 employees, does not include back office functions, so HR, IT, accounting, and that is because we are owned by a much larger parent company, which I'll talk about in a second, the Zesh Group, which actually acquired us in 2018. We have offices, the US, our office is based in San Jose, where we've got pretty much the vast majority of our engineering staff and support staff. In Bad Homburg in Germany, which is right outside of Frankfurt, which is too bad Light and Building probably isn't happening this year. It's a great place to visit. We've got more engineers, sales folks, technical support, and then in India, we have pretty much a sales-only dedicated team over there. We've done projects in over 20 countries, so all those green lit up spaces on the map are places where we've deployed projects, with the vast majority of them really being in the US and Europe. So we'll talk through that. Wtec, the business itself, was founded in 1989. Kind of the historical background is they're a network integrator. They were acquired by the Zesh Group, which is another large company that no one in the US market at least had really ever heard of, myself included, in 2018. They did invest heavily in us. So we had 20 employees at the time, and now we are over 40. And so that's in just under 18 months. Zesh is the largest privately owned construction and real estate development company in Germany. They do $2.5 billion in sales, predominantly in Germany, but more of that is expanding international, over 10,000 employees, and a very healthy balance sheet, which I think is an important thing to consider when you're deciding on technologies that are going to be in your building for 10, 20 plus years, the staying power of the company that's backing those technologies. So they've been a fantastic resource for us, and we're really happy to be a part of their team. We do have projects dating back to 2010. We've done over 600 projects worldwide, over 30 million square feet in over 20 countries. And so, you know, this is kind of a spattering of some of our clients. About half those projects are in the US. with the rest kind of in Europe and India as well. So talk a little bit about our company. We'll talk now about the system itself, and then we'll dig into the value proposition and why we kind of feel that's important. I think everyone knows traditional lighting and controls, right? What that looks like. You've got, 277 volt, 120, 208, whatever it is in the ceiling, high voltage wires that need to be stepped down with a driver to power the LEDs that require low voltage power. And then everything else that sits on top of that is effectively an overlay that's been an evolutionary kind of change over, dozens and dozens of years where, code continues to evolve and controls kind of get shoehorned into the platform. But it ultimately ends up being disparate systems to deliver power, control, and communication. It's kind of, outdated. It's been around. I mean, this hasn't changed much in over 100 years in terms of what actually is required to power lights. And the history of all this was to power incandescents, right? So you needed AC voltage. You really don't need it today. And our view is, why don't we take it out of the ceiling? So that's effectively what we do. So for those that are familiar with some of the PoE concepts out there, we are very similar to PoE. I would call it traditional PoE, but we do things a little bit differently. So starting with our Smartengine, this is in effect our power, control, and communication platform, kind of all in one. So it's a 48 port, 2200 watt, 1.5 RU rack mounted device. It can deliver power out to fixtures at up to 100 meters, which is all based on TIA or ANSI standard compliant structured cabling topology. So you can fully leverage the low voltage aspect of this and the installation network of folks that are competent in network installations to deliver now power and control to your lights. So I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison here between us and what I would call traditional systems. So a traditional PoE system would deliver fixed voltage power out of its head end over structured cabling, just like us. And then there's an extra step to convert that fixed voltage power to fixed current power. That would be a DC to DC driver that sits at every fixture. We do it a little bit differently. So we actually deliver safety extra low voltage fixed current power, which is what 95+% of LED fixtures on the market today accept. That allows us to eliminate a power conversion step that sits out in the field. So one is it increases system efficiency because there's no power conversion step after you've kind of traveled the distance of that cable. And two, there's not a failure point now in the ceiling because all of the components that we have that are deployed out in the field are passive devices. There's no power conversion. There's no active componentry in those devices. So it fundamentally actually makes a lot more sense compared to traditional PoE, where you've still got drivers like you would with traditional lighting, and then you've got added componentry that kind of sits in the back in your rack. The other thing that happens with traditional PoE lighting is all of the devices that sit out in the field, nodes, gateways, depending on the platform that you're talking about, they've got different names. The devices that sit out in the field are managed over IP addresses. So that means, let's just take a 100,000 square foot space as an example. You may have 400 nodes out in that field, maybe 300 to 400 nodes that all need to be managed on a network, right? So you talk to your average IT, networking professional, and they'll tell you that the average cost to operate one of those, an IP address, or manage it over the course of a year is about $100. So for your 100,000 square foot space, you just added, up to $40,000, in some cases more, in some cases less, cost to your operating bill annually to manage those IP addresses. And part of that is service contracts that go along with PoE devices. The other component is network security. So if you've got devices out in the field that are speaking over an IP address, they're fundamentally accessible devices to the network. They need to be speaking to the network, which means if you've got a bad actor, in theory, you've now got 400 additional devices in your building that need to be managed and monitored closely. We have IP addresses, but we have one per device. So each Smartengine gets an IP address, and that allows the devices to talk across one another. Also to our director, which does have an open API and a backnet over IP where we can communicate externally to other devices. But now what we've done is you've removed all the IP addresses from the ceiling. You've reduced your IP count, your IP address management count by a factor of about 30. And you've also, effectively eliminated the security component, because if someone can access your IDF or MDF, and a bad actor, then you've got bigger problems than us having a couple of IP addresses on your network. So what does all that mean, right? So everyone's kind of talked about, PoE being the IoT, the connected ceiling, intelligent buildings, kind of all these things that are thrown around as buzzwords. We'll talk about, what our system allows us to do. And one of the big things that we focus on is the sensor, right? So we have a sensor interface and we've got a few different ways that we can do this, but the simplest way to think about it is approximately kind of a one-to-one sensor per fixture interface. And what that does is it deploys a dense sensor network throughout your entire built environment, because what do you need through your entire built environment is you need lights, right? So what better of a conduit to provide insight into your building than the lighting system, which sits overhead, kind of every space in the building. So we'll talk more about that and kind of what that means, but in our view, you've got to have lights, you've got to be able to power and control them efficiently, especially as codes are continuing to evolve. But the real value driver, in our view, and to a lot of our clients, is what you can actually do with those sensors, which we'll talk about. Our standard sensor, it includes 4 measurements. So you're getting motion through a digital passive infrared sensor. You are getting daylight, so you'll have a photo cell, so you can do daylight harvesting at a per fixture level, and we'll talk about how that drives energy efficiency, temperature throughout your entire space, and then we're measuring power consumption through at each individual fixture, which is important for measurement, energy measurement, verification, reporting. We are soon to be coming out with, this summer, a bidirectional Bluetooth low energy beacon, which will be integrated into all of our standard sensors, and then an additional separate sensor, an environmental sensor, which will collect humidity, CO2, and pressure in real time. And obviously, this is kind of on the front of everyone's minds for, things that we need to be thinking about with how the world looks after COVID. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on from this slide, but as I mentioned, just the one other piece is the director. It does have an open API and a backnet over IP, so we can communicate to third-party devices, which we'll talk about. As I mentioned, it's really all about the sensor and having that high-density sensor network and what that can do in your space in terms of giving you an understanding of how your space is being used and giving both actionable insight and tools to the end users of the space to make them more productive. We'll talk about a lot of this in the context of the 3-30-300 rule. So this is something that was popularized by Jones, Lang, LaSalle, I believe in 2013 or 14. But the concept is, great, we can save you a few bucks on your energy bill, but that's not really driving value to our business. It's really understanding, how can I make better use of the real estate, and how can I make better or provide tools that allow the employees to be more productive within that space. So these are kind of some of the things that we'll talk about, and just in the interest of time, I probably went a little long early on, so we'll skip through this and address all these individually. But you've got, that 3, 30, and 300 kind of kind of covering these pieces. Again, we've got a high-density sensor network, an open application programming interface, which allows you to unlock the value of those sensors, all built on a low voltage DC power and control infrastructure, which is going to be critical when it comes to future changes in your building and cost to actually to deploy our system at the onset. So on the energy side, the system was initially designed as to be the world's best lighting control infrastructure. So our view is, we are the best in the business in lighting. We typically provide lighting power densities in the range of 0.1 to 0.3 watts per square foot. So if you're trying to achieve, LEED Gold, LEED Platinum on your building, this is a great place to start. HVAC integration, so we get savings ranging from 10 to 30% through BMS system integration, and we've done it with almost basically every major BMS system on the market. Plug load control is kind of another area where we can have shutoffs for plugs that allows you to kind of eat into that kind of all other components, which is really plug load and base building. So our view is that motion in space and the power used to light up those lights should track each other very, very closely. They should have a high correlation. There's a variety of things we can get into the details of, but follow me mode lighting, so you can have corridor pathway lighting that goes up and down, much smaller zones, which are easy to commission and re-provision, daylight harvesting on a per fixture basis, and then more aggressive timeouts, just because we've got more sensors in a space. So rather than having a 15-minute timeout, we can do a 5-minute timeout out, have rooms that aren't basically using light when they're not needed is kind of the concept. And that drives deep, deep energy savings. On the HVAC side, predominantly what we're using is our sensor data to say if the space is unoccupied, why would we heat or cool it unnecessarily? So the idea is you adjust VAVs based on, when the last motion was in a building. Now, there's other applications as well that we've discussed, concepts of, if there are a number of motion hits, you can actually increase the HVAC to increase airflow in a space, things of that nature. These are all kind of future considerations that we're going to be forward-looking as we think about kind of coming out of the back end of the COVID-19 situation. We've done this at very large scale. So the first, very large project we did this on was for a project for NetApp in India. It was over 1 million square feet. We had full HVAC integration with over 2,200 VAVs. The engineering firm that actually designed the space was able to reduce their overall chiller plant size considerably as part of that. Knowing that we would be able to save them considerable on their predominantly AC spend because there's not a lot of heat being used in buildings in Bangalore. With regards to LEED, up to 27 points, most of that comes from optimizing energy performance, but there are another of, innovation, energy measurement and verification. Kind of all of these things help, build towards, certified silver, gold, or platinum, and these tend to be very cost-effective ways versus some of the other tools that are needed to kind of get to those high numbers on LEED. So that's all on the energy side of things. I'm going to move over to the space analytics, and we'll get into kind of the people management tools and things of that nature. But because we have sensors that are effectively collecting real-time data and we're communicating back and forth sub-100 millisecond ranges, we are able to do things in real time. We're also able to gather a lot more data than you would with just a single zone aux sensor. So one of the areas is, hey, not only can we tell when a space is being used, but to a high degree of precision, we can tell how full that space is, right? Because normally, if you have one zone aux sensor in a conference room, you're not going to be able to tell that. You need to use some other system. We would deploy substantially more. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6, maybe it's 10 sensors depending on the size of the room, and that will be able to tell you based on how many of those sensors are being pinged. Not only is that space being used, but how full is it, right? And that allows facilities people, commercial real estate professionals, actionable insight that they normally pay a lot of money for in the form of time motion studies where they go around with clipboards determining how many people are in a space. Well, this allows you to do that in real time and continuously updated, right? Because what building that's built is basically the same, the day that it's being used the same way the day that people move in, and 6 months, 12 months, 5 years down the line. It's always changing. So having that data and continuously updated is very important. So reports.
I want to interrupt. That software that you actually show in the question that comes up a lot is who's providing that software, and do you have a yearly license, or is it easy to monitor?
Great question. So we provide it as a baseline. There are things that can be done off of it, but all these reports are free to export from from the system. So it's a great point too, because there are other solutions out there that have kind of used this data as a service view. We don't really take that view. We'd love to, but again, the market doesn't really seem to want to accept that. But so what we do is once that system is installed, the end user owns every piece of data that's produced in it, right? It's not sent third party into the cloud and then has to be bought back from the system developer. It's owned and can be used, right, locally by the end user of the space. So yeah, great point. And these are some of the reports that can be generated basically just through our UI by downloading these into reports. So that's on the space side of things. One of the areas that I think has been a particular area of focus for us with a lot of our clients is things like conference room management, right? So conference room management effectively becomes time management of employees, because a lot of times people spend time walking around trying to find a room. They're wasting a lot of time, and those employees, you know, are both the most valuable and the most expensive piece of any, you know, kind of white collar business that's building office space. So if you can find ways to improve their ability to go operate within that space, and something as simple as a real-time occupancy map that says, hey, if there's been motion within 90 seconds within any one of these rooms, right, that room is red, and if there hasn't been motion for over 90 seconds, that room is now available, right? And that can be tied into calendaring systems, so you can make rooms available if they're booked but then never get used, which happens about 30% of the time. Think recurring weekly staff meetings. And then, you know, it just really helps with the unscheduled events, which seem to be becoming more and more of a trend in the work culture. So, you know, that's one piece. Now, another piece that's interesting is you can look at these large conference rooms and start pulling data from that analytics page that says, hey, these rooms are never more than 40% occupied, right? Which means maybe we can now take this room, chop it into 2 rooms, and we've doubled our conference room space without having to pay for a single extra square foot of, you know, Manhattan or other, you know, name your expensive market real estate. So these are kind of some really important drivers of both, you know, worker productivity and then understanding and analyzing your space management. Partner built applications. So one of the things I forgot to mention at the beginning is Zesh Group has actually acquired a number of different platform technology companies under what they call their property technology or PropTech kind of incubator. And so there are a number of these companies. We are working to tie in with a lot of them. This application was built by one of those partner companies, and they skinned it specifically for HIT contracting for one of the labs that they built. So heat maps, room booking, incident reporting. So these are all kind of things that can be built and enhanced through the sensor data that comes off of our platform. And there are a dozen other use cases which, you know, we can talk about. I know we're limited on time today, so I'm going to cut that off there, just hit some of the highlight ones, and we'll talk a little bit about cost, right? So we view that if you're kind of getting an honestly brokered cost estimates from contractors on how to install, you know, our solution, PoE solutions, really in general, with low voltage, you can save considerably. So we've been told, and we've been given ranges anywhere from the time it takes to install our system is anywhere from 40 to 60% less than traditional line voltage lighting, right? Why is that? Well, you don't need rigid conduit that's bolted into walls. You don't need nearly as many J boxes, right? All of these things, you know, that on the one hand take a lot of time and a lot of planning, and two, you know, require very high cost labor to do. You're now replacing that with stuff that hangs in J hooks, stuff that hangs in cable raceways, which may already be in your space, so you're leveraging existing infrastructure. And then at the end of that, all that cabling, you've got your fixture, right? So wire splicing becomes a thing of the past. Everything is RJ45 terminated, so it becomes very plug and play from an installation standpoint. Now, there's one piece, you know, that is your base installation. So there's a commissioning component to that, which can be costly. And I know a lot of the other PoE providers that do everything over IP have a very costly commissioning component. Ours is much different. We actually do it over our own UI. It's drag and drop. So if you can create a folder and a subfolder like you can on your desktop, you can effectively now create all of your zones and groupings for all of the fixtures in your space. We leverage something called flashlight commissioning, which allows you to then grab all the fixtures in a space, put them into groups, and then set your policies accordingly. So we've been given numbers, and every market's a little bit different, so I don't want to speak to any one particular market, but the numbers that we've seen is if you've got an honestly brokered you know, install budgetary quote, you can come in full stop, you know, total cost of install for lights, controls, and all the infrastructure to deliver power to that at up to 25% below a traditional line voltage system. So that becomes a really important component because no one wants to spend a ton of money when they don't have to, and we don't think that you do. In terms of compatible fixtures, so obviously I've called out our SDA line card partners. We're adding more and more to that by the day, but we've got a number of the very high-end, you know, architectural grade commercial lighting manufacturers under our belt. This is a small sampling of that, and we're continuing to work with more. And it's important to note that we don't make any fixtures, right? So we are happy to work with anyone, and our product is pretty simple comparatively in that there are actually no drivers, which a lot of fixture manufacturers really like the concept of. Rather than having to replace their standard driver with a PoE driver, in the case of traditional PoE, we remove that component completely. So it tends to be pretty easy to work with fixture manufacturers. So I'll pause there. I know we're probably already over the 30 minutes. I don't know if we've lost everyone already, but if you're still hanging on, this is where we kind of get more into the design aspect of this. So I think we'll spend a few minutes just on some of the projects that we've gone through. Unless, Elena, are there questions that make sense to address now?
No, so far so good. So far so good. No
okay,
questions.
great.
Oh.
So just to give a sense of design flexibility, this is just a handful of projects. Oh,
just got a question. What is the output wattage of the Smartengine input?
Great question. So we deliver up to 34 watts per channel directly into the printed circuit board of an LED fixture. So it's really more like a 38-ish watt rated fixture, because most fixtures are rated into the input driver, and there's a 10-ish% driver loss, right? And so the first thing that people will ask is, okay, well, that's a lot less than, you know, the 90 watt UPoE++ system. So just to go down that rabbit hole a little bit, it's a bit of a misnomer, the 90 watt, because 90 watts is out of the head end of the network switch. You have to account for the voltage drop that happens over ANSI TIA standard cabling plant, and the driver, the DC to DC driver conversion loss. So that from end to the fixture actually drops that power consumption down to maximum rated of 72 watts. And somewhat that'll be dependent on the voltage that happens at those fixtures at the end there. So it's not even necessarily always that high. That also assumes that you're using a very efficient cabling plant. And one of the things that we do differently, and quite honestly, we viewed it as to keep everything TIA ANSI standard, you limit the power that goes across those cables, because fundamentally little skinny wires aren't meant to receive or aren't meant to transmit high levels of power. So unless you have a very highly efficient low ohm resistance cabling, we're probably getting a little bit too technical, but I'm sure there's some folks that are interested. You lose a lot of power over those cables, one, and two, you generate a whole lot of heat. So it actually changes your bundling requirements depending on the cable plant that you're using, if you are using that 90 watt UPoE++ standard. So we end up with a little bit more cabling, but you can do it all completely on standards-based topologies. So that's hopefully that answers that question.
And Smartengine has 48 inputs, correct?
48 ports, yep, and a 2200 watt power supply. Yeah.
Gotcha. So we had a few more questions that came up. Does Smartengine have tags that do programming of the system, or is this is it being handled by installer?
It depends on the situation. So for the most part, we would be having our techs on site to do the work, but we do have certified installation partners that, if they've gone through the appropriate training process, will be certified to actually commission. It just depends on the location and, you know, the project specifics. But we always, you know, volunteer our people. I shouldn't say volunteer because we do charge for it, but we charge a modest amount. We can cover a lot of ground in a single business day because of the efficiency of the commissioning of our system.
And if this is in addition to that, just to piggyback, if this is a local project, then as the A team, we have seven people in controls department. We will be getting certified once this COVID situation is over. We'll be getting certified, and we'll be doing our commissioning as well. There is one more question here. How is the my favorite, how is the emergency lighting handled?
Well, that's a great question, and depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, and we've done, I would say, close to 12 million square feet across the U.S. that are completely EM, all the EM lights are powered and controlled with our system and certified. So our entire portfolio of products is UL 924 listed. Now, what that means specifically for New York is to be determined. We are having some pretty in-depth conversations with the UL, the UL teams, and hopefully we'll be having conversations with the Department of Buildings, because there are specific fire codes as it relates to New York. And right now, as the letter of the law says, POE systems, right, traditional POE systems are not allowed to do EM lights. Technically, we are a remote drive, safety extra low voltage power delivery system, which would not fall under that. And we are optimistic that we will be certified to do EM in New York, but I can't say for certain that that is available as of today. Hopefully we can say with a short period of time that we'll have precedent for that in the city of Manhattan, or in the borough of Manhattan.
Thank you. No more questions for now.
Okay, great. So more on the design side, just want to give you a sense. So one of the things that a lot of architects and lighting designers will first point out, will say, 90% of the office space, the high-end office space that we do, is open ceiling now. So where do you put all of the sensors that you have that are gathering all this great information that you're going to give back to your clients? We need to figure out, where all this stuff goes before, we're all just hanging it, 1,000 watt boxes from the ceiling. So this gives you a kind of a good example. So Gymshark, this is a competitor to Lululemon. This is their office headquarters in the UK. So you can see, basically, we've got a number of fixtures, and we've worked pretty closely with fixture partners over the years to develop integrated fixtures. So this is a pretty interesting concept here. But linears, particularly suspended linears, we often will do embedded sensors either throughout the continuous runs or on the end caps. And then turns out there's actually a lot of places where you can pretty easily place sensors throughout the space. So the nice thing is, when you're in JIP, when you're in tile, these sensors tend to disappear. And if they're embedded in fixtures, then they also, they blend right in. So this is Google's office in Bangalore. It's about 500,000 square feet. And this client was particularly interested in using sensors almost laid out like a T-grid, so they could get really granular data on how their space is being used. So here's a sensor here for this continuous run, and I believe there might be one on the other side. And then you've got these, suspended watt boxes that are almost laid out like a grid. You can see the same thing here, where the sensors are all placed throughout. But we've got different color sensors if you want to put them in different locations that have, aesthetic, kind of aesthetic tiling or something like that. That can all be arranged as well. Here's another example, open ceiling, JIP, the sensors tend to disappear. Here's a good shot of kind of a really open ceiling concept. There are actually a lot of sensors deployed throughout this, but they become really hard to see. They tend to blend right in. So when we work really closely with fixture manufacturers, we can do some really cool stuff. So we've done, fully integrated sensors right in every single fixture that goes into a building. Some of this obviously requires a little bit more close project management and interface with the fixture manufacturers. But assuming there's a good place to put it, none of these things generate heat, so there's not a huge engineering task. It's more just finding the space to put that fixture. So it's not like a driver where you're going to have to do all sorts of additional rigorous testing. You're worried about, you need to thermally bleed those things. It's because it's a passive device. It's not really an issue in that regard. So I won't kind of beat this up too much, but you get the idea, is that you can find places to place sensors that they tend to kind of disappear in the space unless you're putting little green circles around them. So I'll close here, so I know we're pretty well over time, but why do clients choose us, right? So one, we are deploying a dense sensor network as a standard throughout the built space. Compared with traditional POE systems, most are based on kind of traditional standard zone-off sensor protocols, which are limited in terms of what actual building intelligence or connected ceiling or IoT applications they can actually provide. So our view is you should really kind of get, it's all about the sensor data to be able to actually deliver some of these things. We deliver best-in-class energy savings. I think in a lot of markets, particularly New York, there is, ever-increasing standards on energy efficiency. And, I think that trend is going to continue into the future. And so by having advanced control for lights, you can do a lot of things on the energy saving side. especially if you're thinking about LEED for your building. The end user does have complete ownership of all the data produced by the system. So whoever asked that question, thank you very much. That was in my closing arguments. We've got projects dating back to 2010 demonstrating long-term system performance. So we've been doing this a long, long time. There are some competitors that are kind of recent upstarts. And, you know, they'll say they've been doing it for a while, but they probably don't have, you know, a warranty cycle under their belt yet. So, and we've got an experienced team with a very strong, well-capitalized parent company ownership, which I think is very important as we think about coming out of the back of the economic uncertainty that we're in, knowing that there's staying power for the company that you're working with.
We had another question that came up. Oh, perfect.
Great.
Yeah, so the question is about the architecture of the system. Are the sensors one-to-one for lights, or can you daisy chain multiple lights on a sensor?
Great question. It is not always one-for-one, and you can daisy chain, particularly things like downlights. We also have a few other devices where you can have, you know, 3 input channels of power, so up to 102 watts per sensor. So we have a lot of design flexibility on the sensor front, so we can reduce that sensor count pretty significantly if we need to. And we've had some recent projects where that was the request of the lighting designer and the architect. So we actually reduced that sensor count from 1-to-1 to more like 1-to-3. And so you still get a pretty rich amount of data coming off of that, but at the same time, it gives you a more manageable number of sensors to manage in the space. And this one in particular had a lot of open ceiling, so we needed to figure that out. So good question. And we do have design flexibility without going into too many weeds, and I'd be more than happy to follow up with whoever had the question. We've got a variety of ways that we can manage that sensor count.
Another question came up. Can you do human-centric lighting?
Yes, great question. So that was one of the applications that I, for the interest of time, left off. But yes, because we can control channels independently, we've done human-centric lighting on a very large scale. I mean, we've done, the largest space we've done was about 150,000 square feet with the entire building, human-centric lighting. This was for Merck in Germany. We also did daylight harvesting and circadian rhythm tracking over the course of the year. So we built an algorithm that allowed to have that process track the actual sun's you know, movement across the sky over the course of the year. So yes.
So far, I think. Oh, here's another. Are all devices produced by Smartengine? Are they manufactured by you guys?
Yep. So yes. So that's a big difference, and I think you know, some of our competitors will try to knock us for that. But the fact of the matter is, you know, you'll say whether you're using a Cisco switch or someone else, and it's a standards-based, you know, PoE system. The fact of the matter is, every other lighting controller that's based on PoE has proprietary components. So yeah, maybe you don't need to replace the Cisco boxes, but if you're thinking about swapping anything out, you got to replace everything else. Our view is actually it actually helps consolidate, because all of the software and power and control and delivery sits natively on all of our engines. So our engine is going to be, you know, the brawn and the brains with the ingrained native software locally on every device, rather than a third-party you know, lighting controller network switch that now has to speak to those devices. So that creates a level of redundancy in our system that we think is important. One-stop shop,
right? And I guess, do you want to talk about lead times, or is it in stock? What's that situation with shipping?
So we actually just finished relocating our warehouse, which was in Minnesota, to Virginia. So we hold inventory on every single one of our components. We can typically ship when an order is placed within 48 hours.
Good, great. Hold on.
So I guess one kind of just knowing the audience, in terms of design assistance, things of that nature, you know, view me as kind of your main point of contact. I think Elena will kind of send out everything. If you have questions, if you want to dig in more, if you need guidance, right? You know, our view is that we need to, you know, we need to be as helpful as possible, right? We are not, you know, we're not the de facto standard in lighting. You know, we hope one day we will be, and everyone will know and understand this stuff. But we're cognizant of the fact that we can't act like, I would say, traditional manufacturers in the lighting world. You know, responding to an email within 2 weeks doesn't work. We like to do it within 2 hours. So, you know, expect, you know, any resources that you need, our team will be able to provide and help you through any design process if projects come up.